Hello, everyone. Thanks, Pat, and thanks, everyone, for being here. So as Pat mentioned, I wanted to talk to you about leading software teams with systems thinking. But you might be wondering, why should you care, and why is that important? So I want to start with the problem that I see here. And the problem that I see is there's a lot going on for engineering managers. I've experienced that, and I see other managers experiencing as well. There's like, from project delivery, for like challenges with people, to like all the kind of other changes that are happening within your organization. How do you find where to put your time? I think like where does your focus as a manager goes to? And that's a challenge that, because not only if you focus on the right thing, on the wrong thing, you're like wasting time, of course, you're wasting your own time, but also because acting on the wrong area might cause more negative results than actually improvements. So I wanted to talk a bit about like how I have solved the problem for myself in my career. And like, mostly it's been about like using systems thinking to drive my focus. And that's kind of like the main idea. But of course, it's a bit more complicated than that. And I wanted to give you a practical perspective on how to do that. But before we start on the practical perspective, let's go back a bit to the basics. I think Pat has mentioned systems thinking is the idea that's been going on in the industry for a while. But what is systems thinking? And if you go back to Wikipedia, which is where all knowledge is, it talks about systems thinking being like this way of looking at the world where you're making sense of the whole and the relationships between all the interconnected parts, rather than looking at a part itself. So it's kind of like if you have a problem, instead of looking at the problem from a close range, like look at what's around it and how like all the systems are interconnected. And if you look at this is like a broad industry, of course, a broad term, but one particular person that's interesting to talk about is Deming. And Deming, some of you might have heard of him, like he's an American professor that was kind of like an inspiration or started the lean production movement in Japan. And kind of like he worked a lot on quality systems and using systems to drive quality improvements. And kind of the big idea, one of the big ideas that he had was this idea that systems are stronger than people and than individuals. And I think Charity mentioned here the social technical systems. So the idea that like doesn't matter how competent, skilled, motivated, and kind of willing to do the work someone is, if they're put in a system that's unproductive, they're going to be constrained, and that's going to be a challenge. Also, one thing that's interesting to talk about when talking about systems is just like the common reaction that you get from people that systems, talking about processes and talking about systems is going to make their environment restrictive. Whenever I talk to managers about like, let's think about the system, like a common reaction they have is just like, oh, this is going to be like a lot of like process going to be put onto like my team. And so I just want to make clear that when we're talking about systems here, we're talking about creating processes that are like well-designed, implemented, that actually created to empower people to deliver their full potential and not to be restrictive and constrain them to kind of like to something that's unproductive. Okay, so that was systems thinking 101. So going back to the problem that we are kind of the problem that we're trying to talk about, which is how do you use this theory and these techniques to drive your focus, and in particular, how do you lead using systems thinking? So I want to talk you through a practical approach that I've been taking and I've been using, like also with managers that work with me, to kind of drive leadership with this way of thinking. And the way I look at it is like broadly in three broad steps. One is understand the goals that you're trying to achieve. And I think like if you look at your team that you're managing or the group that you're managing, what are their goals and what's the goal of this kind of system that you manage? Secondly, inspect that work as a series of processes that are connected to each other. So when you understand the goals for your team, then look at the work. And one kind of common saying is like, understand how the work works. So understand how the work moves, how the work is kind of passing through people, and what kind of the processes that are kind of making that happen. And lastly, then use that to actually manage those systems and kind of improve and get the results that you want. That is still pretty high level. So let's talk a bit more specifically about software teams, how to achieve that within software. And the way I look at it is like when I think about software teams, I think about two main goals that I try to approach. One is teams have to be highly productive and continuously improve. So they have to be delivering the product or the features or whatever the business impact that they kind of need to. Also, they've been trying to improve all the time and kind of getting better at what they do. But secondly, they also have to have engineers, of course, from a perspective of an engineering manager, have to have engineers that are fulfilled and actually want to work and kind of grow in their careers and want to work in the team. Okay, so you have the goals. And now what you can do is actually you can start looking at your work and your systems to kind of understand how that team is working. And looking at the work as a series, not as in a particular area, but a series of systems that are interconnected. When you think about teams, one way that I like to approach it is looking into these three areas. So there are product, engineering, and people. And you might think why these three is because these three are the areas that any team would need to be successful in the long term. So they have to deliver the product that they are supposed to deliver or the business value. They have to deliver the quality they're supposed to deliver so that system lasts and customers like it and keep using it. And the people within that team need to be fulfilled at work, and they have to stay in the team and not want to leave at the first opportunity. So in practice, what can you do when you're kind of looking at those areas? So, for example, in product, you can think about, in my team, how does the work go from idea to production? So in my company, when someone has an idea, who is the person who has the idea, and what are the steps that it takes for that work to get into production in the hands of customers? Who is working on that? How are the requirements and tasks defined? Once that idea is kind of moving forward the process, who is writing the requirements? Who is defining how the work should be done? How is success defined? Is your team oriented around deadlines, or is it oriented around business impact? All of those things are going to influence how your team works. On the engineering perspective, you can think about how iterations manage, how the sprint works, and do you have goals or you don't have goals? To kind of point to the presentation before, how is on-call? Is on-call busy? Do you wake up all the time or not? How are incidents managed? How is quality verified? Do you have QAs? You don't have QAs? Does your team do quality assessments? Is there another team that does it? Is it automated? Is it manual? It's all these questions are just defining how the work works. And on the people side, think about what are the feedback loops that your engineers have. For example, when they do technical work with writing code or writing technical docs, how do they get feedback? How much feedback they get? But also within their career in the company, where are they getting feedback from the manager, from the peers, and how is that being presented to them? How are they learning on the job? What are the opportunities they have to learn while doing the work? While they actually doing the work and writing code or whatever whatever work they're doing. So, well, these are not exhaustive, or it's an exhaustive list, of course, but they're examples of things that you can ask yourself as you're trying to understand how the work works within your team and how the system is. And it's good to keep in mind that everything, of course, is interconnected. So none of these examples that I gave here, they're going to be isolated from each other. So how one thing goes, if you change one side, it's going to impact the other, and that's something you have to take into account. And then finally, once you have your goals now, you understand how your team works, you can act. So you can identify the issues, you can get the buy-in from the team, you can improve the system, and you can measure the results. And this is really the big message that the one message I want to leave here is just the whole idea of system thinking is just instead of focusing on the parts, focus on the system. So when there are, adjust the system. So when there are issues or improvements that you want to make, don't think about what's broken in particular, but think about what's happening around that issue that's making that happen. So some examples is when someone is underperforming, don't just look at the person and say they have to be more motivated, but think about what's happening within the team that's leading to underperformance by this person. When your team is not delivering as fast as you want, it's not about going there and putting more pressure in the team because that's the only thing you can do. It's about understanding what's happening around the team and how the work is moving to make that team behave as it is and getting the results that you have. And this is not only going to help your team be more effective, but it's also going to help you focus your time because you're moving from the situation of having a to-do list of things that you have to achieve to having one single goal, which is you need to fine-tune, continuously fine-tune and adjust your team. You need to understand the challenges you have, you understand your goals, you understand the challenges that you have to achieve those goals, and create improvements, continuous improvements that you can adjust to get the results that you want. So in summary, to leave like the summary of this message. So like think about systems, think about how the pieces are interconnected, how everything kind of like relates to each other. Understand the goals that your team has and like what you're trying to achieve. Look at these 3 areas of product engineering and people to kind of understand your team and identify like how the team works, and then act and trying to see the results and continuously improve. Keep doing that until you get the results that you want, until your team is delivering the results that you aspire for. So that's my message. Thanks, everyone. Hope you can use a bit of systems to make your team better, and have a great day.